Welcome back to our channel. In this video, we'll discuss economic growth and development as a topic which forms part of economic pursuits under the economics curriculum for grade 12 learners. This video will cover the following. We'll first start by providing an overview of economic pursuits and how economic growth and development fits into this broader topic. We'll then define and differentiate between economic growth and economic development. We'll also cover the demand-side approach, as well as the supply-side approach. We'll then turn our focus to the evaluation of the approaches used in South Africa, including what is meant by the North-South divide. We'll then conclude by providing a summary of key points covered in this video, as well as what to prepare for in your final economics exam paper. So, subscribe now to Kano Academy. And let's explore this fundamental topic of economic growth and development as part of the subject of economics. Let's first provide an overview of the broader topic of economic pursuits and how economic growth and development fits into this broader topic. Economic pursuits is generally considered a main topic that deals with how countries try to improve their economies and the well-being of their people. It moves beyond just measuring performance, like GDP, and looks at the strategies and policies used to achieve long-term progress. This is essentially the action plan for a country's economy. Topics covered under economic pursuits include economic growth and development, which we are covering now. Also included under economic pursuits are topics such as industrial development policies, as well as social and economic indicators. In this next section, we'll discuss economic growth, as well as economic development, and also differentiate between these two concepts. On the one hand, economic growth is a quantitative concept which refers to an increase in the real output of a country over a given period. This is typically measured by the annual percentage change in real gross domestic product, or GDP. For example, if South Africa's GDP grew from 4 trillion rands to 4.2 trillion rands in a year, the economic growth rate would therefore be 5%. Economic development, on the other hand, is a broader, qualitative concept which refers to an increase in a country's real gross domestic product per capita over time. Economic development is basically a process that concentrates on people's standards of living, self-respect, and freedom of choice. It typically includes factors such as poverty reduction, reduced inequality, better education and healthcare, job creation, as well as political freedom and social stability. The takeaway here is that it is possible to have economic growth without development. That is, a country may experience an increase in GDP, but most people don't see or even feel any actual improvements in their living standards. The reverse is also true. People may see improvements in their social well-being, such as better education, healthcare, and reduced inequality. This can be achieved through policies that redistribute wealth or improve the quality of services, even if the country's total economic output remains stagnant or economic growth is slow. Let's now cover the two approaches to economic stimulus: the demand-side approach and the supply-side approach. Starting with the demand-side approach, which was famously associated with economist John Maynard Keynes. This approach focuses on stimulating aggregate demand, which is the total spending in the economy, to promote growth. A demand-side approach includes discretionary changes in monetary and fiscal policies, with the aim of changing the level of aggregate demand. But how does the demand-side approach work? The idea is that if people, businesses, and the government spend more, firms will produce more goods to meet this demand. In order to produce more, they will even need to hire more workers, leading to higher employment and incomes, which creates even more spending. This then leads to a positive cycle. Policies used under the demand-side approach include the monetary policy, as well as the fiscal policy. In South Africa, the monetary policy is driven by the South African Reserve Bank. This policy aims to stabilize prices by managing inflation. The South African Reserve Bank would therefore lower interest rates, which then makes borrowing cheaper, encouraging businesses to invest more, and consumers to buy more on credit. Now let's take a look at the fiscal policy of the demand-side approach. In South Africa, the fiscal policy is driven by the Department of Finance. This policy aims to facilitate government, political and economic objectives. In this instance, the government would increase its own spending, for example, spending on infrastructure, or an increase in the education budget. The government may also cut taxes, which would then put more money in consumers' pockets. Having discussed how the demand-side approach works, and its policies, let's now discuss the supply-side approach. This approach focuses on boosting the economy's productive capacity by making it easier and more efficient for businesses to produce goods and services. The supply-side approach therefore includes anything that can influence the aggregate supply of goods and services, with the focus on microeconomic components. For example, competition and potential output. The government would then use its legislated powers to intervene and to facilitate the smooth operation of markets in order to stimulate growth and development. The supply-side approach essentially involves the following: investing in human capital by improving education and healthcare to create a more productive workforce. Promoting competition through the use of policies to break down monopolies and make markets more efficient. Infrastructure investment by building better roads, ports, and providing internet connectivity to lower business costs. The supply-side approach also involves the provision of incentives for businesses by offering tax cuts or subsidies in order to encourage research, development, and investment in new machinery, as well as deregulation by reducing unnecessary government rules that hinder business formation and growth. Let's now evaluate some of the approaches used in South Africa by looking at the growth and development policies adopted by South Africa. Under economic growth, the focus is on macroeconomic policies. These include measures to achieve the following macroeconomic objectives, namely, higher economic growth, high levels of employment, price stability, exchange rate stability, as well as economic equity. All these measures should be evaluated in terms of international benchmarks. Let's now look at economic development, where the focus now shifts to development policies, or developmental policies. These include measures aimed at achieving industrial, agricultural and human development, including microeconomic initiatives, which facilitate increased competition, opening up of resource markets, enabling of land use, as well as improved environmental policies. Economic development measures also include social care. This involves policies around social welfare and security, as well as poverty alleviation. These are policies aimed at redressing past inequalities, such as policies and regulations around employment equity, Black economic empowerment and broad-based Black economic empowerment, including affirmative action, as well as land redistribution and restitution. Lastly, South Africa's post-apartheid developmental economic policies have achieved mixed results in addressing key macroeconomic challenges, especially when considering the desired outcomes, which were, and still are, to raise the low standard of living, to combat high unemployment, and furthermore, to address low productivity. Speaking of which, let's evaluate some of the growth and development policies introduced by South Africa, aimed at addressing unemployment, poverty, and inequality. Starting with the Reconstruction and Development Programme, commonly referred to as the RDP. This is focused on meeting basic needs such as housing, water, sanitation, and healthcare. While this RDP policy has achieved social improvements like electrification and land reform, it did not significantly reduce unemployment, or even ensure a steady GDP growth. South Africa also introduced a policy called the Growth, Employment, and Redistribution, otherwise known as GEAR. This was a strategy aimed at stabilizing the economy, reducing deficits, and boosting redistribution. While the GEAR policy succeeded in bringing financial discipline, lowering inflation, and building foreign reserves, it did however fail to create enough jobs, neither did it narrow the wealth gap. There was also the Accelerated and Shared Growth Initiative, or USGIZA, which sought to halve unemployment and poverty by 2014, and raise growth to 6%. It invested in infrastructure and supported job creation through the Expanded Public Works Program, or EPWP. However, youth unemployment and productivity challenges still persist. Linked to USGISA, the Joint Initiative on Priority Skills Acquisition, or GIPSA, worked to build skills through training bodies like the CETAs. As indicated, the Expanded Public Works Program, or the EPWP, has been an important program for creating short-term jobs through labor-intensive methods while giving workers basic skills. The New Growth Path, or the NGP, was also another program launched by the South African government, which aimed to create 5 million new jobs by 2020 through focusing on sectors like infrastructure, agriculture, manufacturing, the green economy, and tourism. However, these targets proved to be overly ambitious and difficult to achieve. Some of the reasons for this non-achievement were due to structural economic challenges, including a general economic slowdown, the government's limited ability to foster job creation, as well as the inherent difficulty in achieving rapid growth that translates into jobs. Then there was the National Development Plan, or the NDP, which is South Africa's long-term vision for 2030, focusing on reducing poverty and inequality through the creation of an inclusive economy, improved infrastructure, and fostering private investment and entrepreneurship, amongst other objectives. Other supportive programs include the Small Business Development Promotion Program, or the SBDPP, which helps small and medium enterprises through agencies like the DTI and the IDC. There's also Black economic empowerment initiatives, as well as affirmative action policies, which aim to correct past injustices by promoting equity and transformation in workplaces and businesses. Together, these policies show South Africa's efforts to balance economic growth with social development. Many of the objectives of these policies still remain underachieved. This has resulted in high unemployment and inequality. Let's now discuss what is meant by the North-South divide. This refers to the sharp differences between the rich developed countries in the Northern Hemisphere and the poorer developing countries in the Southern Hemisphere. The global North generally enjoys high standards of living, strong industries, and advanced technology, while the global South struggles with poverty, unemployment, and inequality. One major issue is the standard of living, which is much higher in the North. This is because of higher per capita income, better healthcare, education, and infrastructure. By contrast, many in the South face low wages, poor housing, and limited access to services. Globalization inequalities also deepen the divide between the North and the South. Developed countries often benefit from trade and technology, while many developing countries remain stuck with exporting raw materials and importing expensive manufactured goods. This unequal exchange often prevents developing countries from catching up with developed countries. The environment is also a concern, as both the North and the South face issues like pollution, climate change, and resource depletion. Developing countries, however, often lack the resources to protect the environment, even though they may suffer most from environmental damage. Sustainable development is a long-term solution that promotes economic growth while meeting the needs of the present, without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It aims to balance economic, social, and environmental goals, reducing poverty while protecting the environment through the responsible use of resources. In many countries in the global North, production practices tend to align more closely with sustainable development principles. In contrast, in much of the developing countries in the global South, production practices often do not fully support sustainable development. Before we end the video, here's what you might be asked in the final economics exam regarding the topic of economic growth and development. You may be asked to define economic growth and explain how it differs from economic development. You may also be asked to discuss the demand-side approach by providing examples from the South African context. Another question could be to evaluate the success of South Africa's policies on promoting growth and development. You may also be requested to explain what is meant by the North-South divide and its implications. Also, don't forget that the exam question paper might also include multiple choice questions, as well as short questions, which relate to economic growth and development. In conclusion, this is what we covered in this video. We explored the following: the economic pursuits, as a broad topic, and how economic growth and development fits into this broader topic. We also covered the difference between economic growth and economic development. We then discussed the demand-side approach, as compared to the supply-side approach. We then evaluated South Africa's mix of policies, and their challenges. We then covered what is meant by the North-South divide, as a global development issue. We've come to the end of this video. Remember that you can always re-watch the video if you need more understanding on the topic. We also hope we were able to provide more clarity on this topic. If we have, please leave us a comment below this video, because we'd love to hear from you and what you have learned. Also make sure that you like this video to show your appreciation. And you can also share it on your social media or via WhatsApp. Until we meet again, happy learning from Kano Academy.
Stay creative, stay curious, and stay connected.